welcome to a Wild Mystery Podcast series where we discuss mysteries, histories, and occasionally conspiracies. I'm your host, Dolly.
And I'm your co-host, Belle. Today's trigger warnings include cancer, radiation, workplace safety, mentions of disturbing and gross injuries, as well as illness, and then also death. Up to and including death.
Yeah.
Sorry. Inappropriate jokes.
So I have been trying or working towards getting into the radiography program at my university for 2-ish years. This year, if you don't know, by the way, radiographers run medical imaging machines that use radiation, things like x-rays, MRIs, etc. I've wanted to be a radiographer since I knew what that was, and the day after our last recording session, I got accepted to the program. So today, we are going to celebrate by talking about one of the discoveries that paved the way for medical imaging.
Yep.
And there are certain themes that may be tough to listen to just from a stomach turning perspective.
All right. Which also, before we fully get started, welcome to the last episode of our first season.
Shit, right, yes.
Which is a whole other celebration in and of itself.
Yeah.
We started this back, when was our first episode?
I don't remember.
It was the 5th of something.
Yeah. May
5th?
April?
What day did we start this? I'm gonna have to go check our... May 5th.
Yeah, shit.
Oh my god, it's been 2 months.
What the fuck?
So, we started this with literally a hope and a dream.
Yep. And I'm surprised at how well it's been going, actually.
Yeah, I feel like it's been really good, like, for you and me, like, on an individual level, because, like, we don't really get to hang out as much.
We spend time together.
I know, which is, like, a victory in and of itself in a busy world, so... But it was, like, it was interesting, too, because, like, you had COVID at one point.
Yeah.
And we still managed to, like, make it work with, God bless technology sometimes.
Yeah, I know.
Because we were able to record 4 episodes remotely.
Yeah.
And still hang out, which is just, like, now we don't have any excuse to not.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously we can, if one of us isn't feeling well. But, I don't know, I just want to say kudos to you for, because for those who don't know, Ollie is actually the one who texted me and was like, hey, let's do a podcast. And I literally, how fast did I text you back? It was
very
fast.
Quickly, and you were immediately like, yes, tomorrow. Like,
which I almost want to go find these texts and just, like, post pictures of them, because it was literally like, hey, we should start a podcast. Yes, absolutely. What are we going to talk about?
Yeah.
And then literally that same night, within an hour, I had created our Twitter, our Instagram, all of our social media that we currently have, figuring out how we were going to record everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then you created our logo within, 2 days?
Yeah.
Which is still the coolest motherfucking logo ever
I've ever done.
Which we do actually have some stickers of.
Yeah, we might have to do merch at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know, it's been a really interesting 2 months, and I'm really looking forward to...
And I'm enjoying this, definitely. And I feel also that we have not made a dent in our list of potential topics.
Oh my god, I know. Well, and it's like, it's such a thing for me, because I'm like, I truly just do whatever I'm feeling like when I go to write that episode. But it's, I don't know. I just want to say kudos to me and you.
Yes.
We did it. We will have by the end of this episode.
Yeah.
For our close for our first season.
So we're going to be taking a break until October 6th. Is that what we decided?
I think so. Yeah, October 6th, which is also a Thursday. So we're going to continue on with the Thursday theme.
And we're going to come back with a bang.
With some spooky, scary skeletons.
During the month of Halloween.
Which is the only accurate thing. Just celebrating Halloween all month.
Yes.
The spooky season. Part 2.
Indeed, indeed.
All right. I just wanted to start with that,
Yeah.
and then you can go into our potential stomach turning.
Yeah. I don't think it'll be too bad from, like, an emotional perspective. I think it'll just be,
Blech.
yeah, a little gross at some points.
Okay.
But,
Fair enough.
and
Glad I ate.
you're gonna have to keep me on track because I am more interested in radiation than I realized.
Yeah.
So researching this episode was interesting. Because it would be like,
Which-
after the discovery of X-rays, and I'm like, how did that happen? And so I'd go in that, and it would be like, after the discovery of radiation, I'd be like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Like, so you can see how researching this took a while.
Yeah, rabbit hole. Which, by the way, I don't think we've said it. We're discussing this discovery of radium.
Yes, radium, sorry.
So, alrighty.
So, and also this entire area of medicine, you know, having X-rays and radiation, radium discovered, all of that took a very, very short period of time. All of these discoveries related to medicine. So this gets a little confusing when we get into dates and what happened when and that kind of thing. So stay with me.
Okay.
But I tried to break it down as simple as possible.
Okay.
So, but you know, the timeline is a little wonky because I think it gets more confusing if you're talking about it exclusively chronologically than just talking about this was discovered here. Here's all the stuff related to it. Okay, now let's go back in time a little bit and, you know.
Yeah, I get you.
So, 1895, Bavarian?
Bavarian.
Okay. In 1895, Bavarian professor of physics Wilhelm Röntgen. This is another quick side note. I'm not French or Bavarian. I'm sorry in advance.
Yeah.
I've taken a year of French, so I should be ashamed of myself. But Wilhelm Röntgen accidentally discovered X-rays, and this is going to be a theme here. Accidental discoveries, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah.
Every time I looked up one of these, it was like in one of the most well-known accidental scientific discoveries.
Well, it's also like, can you imagine winning a Nobel for something that you accidentally
Yeah.
discovered? Like,
there's going to be a lot of that here.
I imagine so. I kind of was briefly glimpsing ahead, but I just can't even imagine like the frustration because it's like, oh, I accidentally discovered it. It's like, personally, I would feel like a bit of a shame.
I know.
I'm not saying that they are. I'm just saying
And
it's
I mean,
like,
okay, and these, to be fair, this thing that he accidentally discovered is way more well known than the thing that he was studying. So
oh, that's even worse.
I know.
Okay.
And
I'll let you
it
get back to
made
it.
massive like changes in medical technology.
Yeah,
So
no kidding.
and this, keep me on track.
I will do my best,
Yeah.
but I also will find it interesting. So
Yes.
I don't know how much help I'm going to be.
My parents are both engineers. My mom worked for NASA for a while. She still can't tell us what she was doing, which is very cool to me.
Yeah. Top secret.
And almost certainly not aliens, but especially given the way that she responds to alien theories. But it's
Moving
very
on.
interesting. Yeah, moving on. And that kind of thing is the reason that I find this kind of stuff so interesting, is because it is the kind of thing that when I asked my parents for help on assignments, they would be like, here's this other cool thing that happens with this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, just like it all rolls into each other on how things are like fascinating. I don't know. It just, I appreciate learning.
And
learning
is
is
so
a lot
cool.
more interesting when it can be fun.
Yes, and this stuff is very, very cool. So Wilhelm Röntgen accidentally discovers X-rays in 1895. He was studying whether cathode rays, which is something I'd never heard of, but they are basically rays of electrons that you kind of have to make this little like tube to get a cathode ray going.
Okay.
He was studying whether they could pass through glass and ended up discovering, like, basically he shuts off the lights and there's light everywhere, but he knows for some reason that it is not the cathode ray. So he's like, what's up with that? Something is passing through the glass, but it's not the cathode ray.
Yeah.
So he named this ray that could pass through glass an X-ray, with X as in unknown,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, that's well, and also I did not know that it was in 1895.
Yeah. So
That's
he soon found that X-rays could pass through like a ton of different shit, including human tissue, meaning that for the first time ever, doctors could find things like bullets, broken bones, kidney stones, things that people had swallowed, etc., without cutting a patient open. And I think that is something that we take for granted,
oh,
that when a doctor like is going to do surgery, when we've swallowed something, when we have a kidney, like
kidneys.
whether
Well,
or
and
not
like a
our
bullet
bone is
is a good
broken. Yeah.
a bullet is a good example because like
Yeah.
little known fact, when you're shot, the bullet can actually ricochet within your body.
And it can travel in your bloodstream if it gets there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so being able to be like,
And parts of
okay,
it can.
yeah. And poisoning from that bullet,
Yeah.
it could potentially kill you faster than it being stuck,
Yeah.
or
The Iron Man situation. Yeah.
yeah. Dun dun dun. But so it's just, the entry wound and no exit wound doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
mean that it's still right there.
Hmm.
So knowing where to cut without doing some weird shit
Yeah.
has a lot of
And this is like,
beneficial.
when a doctor does surgery, they want to know what's up. Like, I know, I'm trying to figure out a way to say this so that I don't give too much away, but my dad recently had something where he had the possibility of maybe having to have surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So they did this really cool like 3D imaging thing to figure out where, they were taking samples of a certain organ, and they had this 3D imaging thing where they could look at exactly where all the samples were taken from.
Mm-hmm.
And if they had to operate, they knew exactly where the sample was taken from, exactly where to go, because they had this thing.
That's really
And I
cool.
don't think that people think about what did you do before you could look at, like,
Yeah.
there was a time in medicine, there was a long time in medicine where if you had to do surgery, you were going in blind. Like,
oh yeah, it's like we're gonna figure it out when we get in there, which
if
is
you had
dangerous,
yeah,
impractical, and outdated.
if you had a broken bone, you had to rely on the doctor being like, yes, I know that this is broken.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't
View
actually look.
factors, yeah.
But in 1895,
That
suddenly
changed.
doctors could do that.
Yeah.
And within literally the same year, doctors in Europe were using X-rays for medical imaging. So you can tell how pivotal this was in medicine.
No
just from that.
shit.
Later in 1901, he won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his discovery. He shared it with the Curies, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. So 1895, X-rays are discovered. And in 1896, Henri Becquerel, again, I'm sorry, French people.
I would have said Henry, so I think you're doing great.
I think it's Henri. Becquerel discovers radioactivity, accidentally again, while using fluorescent minerals to study the properties of X-rays. This is a little bit technical, so I tried to kind of dumb it down to a point where I could understand it. But basically, he had these like photographic plates that were only supposed to develop when exposed to an external source of energy, and he was using the sun. So what he was trying to prove was that uranium absorbed the sun's rays and then emitted them as X-rays. So the idea was he would, at least from what I gathered, he'd put the uranium out in the sun, bring it inside, and then put it in the middle of these plates. And then there would be these plates being covered by black paper. And if his theory was true, then after being left like that for a little while, he should be able to take the plates off, or the paper off the plates, and there would be an image of the radium on the plates. So on this particular day, it was overcast, so he couldn't do the experiment. And this theory, it turned out to be wrong. Anyway, but so he stuck the uranium crystals with the plates into a drawer together, and then he later opened the drawer a few days later and developed the plates. And he was really only expecting a faint image, if any, but the image that he developed was amazingly vivid, which means that there was some sort of
reaction.
There was something being emitted from the radium that was not energy collected by the sun. Today, we all know that radium is radioactive, or that uranium, is radioactive.
Yep.
But radioactivity was not discovered until 1896, when Becquerel discovered it. In his later experiments, he discovered that radiation can be bent in a magnetic field, while X-rays can't be. He also discovered that different kinds of radioactivity bend in different directions depending on their electric charges. So there's like positive, negative, and neutral, which I also think is very cool.
Yeah.
So
it's because it is.
Yeah. It was actually Marie Curie that coined the term radioactivity. She and her husband Pierre were excited about his new discovery, his being Becquerel's. So they set out to do some more research. Also, quick programming error. It was not Röntgen that shared his Nobel Prize with the Curies. It was Becquerel.
I was going to say, I was like, wait a second.
What is this? Yeah, so you can see where, like, how this all happened very quickly. Like, X-rays are discovered, radioactivity is discovered because of X-rays, and then the Curies get on all of their discoveries because of the discovery of radioactivity.
Yeah.
So,
that's so
you can
crazy.
see the snowball, yeah.
Yeah.
Pierre and Marie were doing research into radioactivity, which didn't have a name quite yet. In extracting uranium ore from uranium, however, they discovered that the ore was more radioactive than the pure element. And because of that, they concluded that there must be more than just uranium in the ore. So, quick note, because this was something that I talk about later, but I think it might make more sense to talk about now. Materials that are radioactive are generally not very stable. There are certain isotopes of radioactive materials that are more stable than others, but they tend to degenerate into other radioactive materials, and then they degenerate into other radioactive materials and go on and go on and go on until they finally settle into something that isn't radioactive. In radium's case, it eventually degenerates into lead. So, and I think it's likely to be the same for uranium. But anyway, in 1898, they extracted polonium and radium from the uranium ore pitchblende. It's thought that it was named radium after the Latin word radius or ray, because the radiation emitted by it was 3 million times greater than that emitted by uranium. Yes.
I caught that right before you said it, and I was like...
Yeah, I wish you guys could see her reaction to that.
3 million?
3 million. I wasn't initially going to... I was just going to say it is much more radioactive, but then I actually read the amount, and I was like, okay, I gotta say.
That is crazy to me.
Radium, we're going to get into this, is a dangerous element.
Yeah.
So, the Curies continued to research the elements after they discovered them. Pierre worked to understand the physical properties of them, while Marie and her assistant André Debierne worked to refine pitchblende into more radium. Radium it occurs naturally, but not on its own. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So in order to get the pure radium, they had to extract it chemically. And out of several tons of pitchblende, they were only able to refine 1/10 of a gram of radium by 1902. Wow. Yeah. Still, because of this research, Marie was awarded her Doctorate of Sciences in 1902. And in 1903, she became the first woman to ever win a Nobel Prize when she shared it in physics with Pierre and Henri Becquerel. Unfortunately, in 1906, Pierre died when he... So all the articles I read said, like, they really stressed that it was an accident, that he accidentally stepped in front of a cart, which sketches me out.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That they were so insistent about it being an accident.
It was an accident. It was an accident. It was an accident.
It was not murder.
There is no war in Boston.
Yeah.
Say.
So, like, I'm willing to believe, because Pierre, he seemed super into his work. I'm willing to believe he was, like, head buried in a notebook and just didn't notice.
Oh, yeah.
Or rushing across the street, you know? But it sketches me out just a bit that everybody is very insistent it was an accident. Maybe there's some, you know, some controversy there that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am fully on, like, now the whole all I can think of is there is no war in
I know,
Boston.
yeah.
Say. Oh, that
So
is
anyway.
terrifying.
Marie was obviously, like, devastated by this, but she was appointed to his seat as the chair of physics at Sorbonne, becoming the university's first female professor, which is pretty cool. She was the first in a lot of these things.
Good for her.
She vowed to continue her work, and in 1910, she and Debierne successfully isolated pure metallic radium. And then for that, in 1911, she received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, becoming the first person ever to receive a second Nobel Prize. And that is the first person, man or woman.
Get it, girl.
Yeah. So, this was also around when World War I started, and Marie became very, very interested in the potential medical uses of radium and its potential for cancer therapy. The Radium Institute at the University of Paris, which was a major center for nuclear physics and chemistry, began to run under her direction in 1918. And in 1934, she died of, depending on the source you read, either leukemia or aplastic anemia. Either way, this was absolutely definitely caused by decades of exposure to radioactive materials, specifically radium.
Yeah.
This is wild, but there are certain parts of her lab that are still radioactive today that are really, I'll talk about that more later, but
well, I mean, it's like,
some
it
of that
kind of
is
makes sense
really
because it's
cool.
like you think about, like, Chernobyl, you know?
Yeah, and the half-life of radium is long as shit, but anyway. Radium is so, you know, let's talk for a second about what radium actually is.
Yeah.
Radium is a radioactive metal that is formed by the decay of uranium and thorium, and when it decays, it forms radon gas. When radium, I mean, decays, it forms radon gas. It actually occurs in trace amounts in most things in the environment: water, mineral, plants, animals, us.
Mm-hmm.
Because it occurs in the environment naturally, the amounts of radium in public water sources are regulated, but there is no evidence that our exposure to naturally occurring amounts of radium are in any way harmful.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain times, like if you're near a radium mine or you're near a lot of like natural occurring radium and it gets washed into the drinking water, there are times when it can be higher.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, unless there is some reason for it, it is not usually in dangerous amounts in the environment.
Yeah, it's like natural fluoride in water. Yeah.
Additionally, radium isotopes are unstable and continue to decay from uranium and thorium into various elements before eventually landing on lead. Chronic exposure to radium is known to increase the risk of bone, liver, and breast cancer, and radon gas is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the US after smoking cigarettes.
Really?
Yeah.
That is...
Which is wild, isn't it?
I'm actually really shocked by that, to be perfectly honest with you.
I think it must be, like, way behind smoking. But, you know. So pretty much everything when it is first discovered is overused initially.
Mm-hmm.
And that is certainly true for X-rays and radium. X-rays, of course, like they were overused to the point, I thought this was so funny, that they were offered in shoe stores so you could see the bones in your feet. And that was up into the 1940s.
Okay.
And in medicine, they were just like used unrestrained because we didn't understand the risks associated with chronic exposure to X-rays. And I do want to be very, very clear. If today you go into the doctor and they suggest an X-ray, it is safe and it is necessary.
Yes.
The reason that doctors and techs get as far away from imaging machines as they do the reason that they go into a different part of the room, put on a lead apron, they go into a different room, that is because they are exposed to multiple x-rays per day, when for a patient, this is probably something you only get once every few months or years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and by the way, I want to point out, it's like you're assuming a 12-hour shift at least 4 days a week. And especially if you work in a radiology ward, think about that level of exposure.
Yeah.
You're literally like quintupling your
so, like,
increased risk there.
I know for radiographers, eventually when I get this job, I will have to wear a little like badge that will track the amount of radium or radiation, I mean, that I've been exposed to.
I love those
which
things.
are really
Those
cool.
are so cool.
Yeah. And if it turns a certain color, that means I will have to take a certain amount of time off because I've reached my annual limit for radiation, which is kind of...
It's a little scary, but also like really fucking cool.
Really interesting. And the other thing is that when these limits are set, when that annual limit is set, they are taking into account, from what I've read, all these regulations that are put in place to regulate the amounts of radiation that are affecting people. They are meant to be far, far, far below anything that will hurt you.
Oh yeah.
So just because you have reached that limit does not mean you are going to get cancer.
Yeah, it's and like if I remember correctly, like because I also used to take X-rays on people in one of my previous jobs.
Oh yeah.
I remember one of the statistics that I read. There's more radiation in a banana, but than a single film X-ray.
Yeah, there's a lot of radiation naturally occurs in pretty much everything that we eat. And just as a story, I went in because my knee was bugging me a few months ago, and the doctor, he basically was, the end of the exam, he said, okay, I think you need an MRI, but I read in your chart that you are going into radiography, and I don't want to expose you to more radiation than you absolutely need to be. So we could just do the MRI, or I can send you over to an orthopedics physician, and maybe the orthopedic physician can do an exam on your leg and be like, this is a textbook example of XYZ, and maybe you won't need the MRI. It turned out I did. But I tell you that to tell you this, that when you are being suggested by a doctor to have medical imaging tests done, they are thinking about the risks. They are thinking about your potential, because I did not tell this man that that was my major. Yeah. He saw it in my chart and he noted it because it was important. So they are thinking about...
I finally found it. Finally found this graph.
So Belle just discovered...
Let me open it!
The statistics for the leading causes of lung cancer. This is probably in the US. 90% of cases are attributed to active smoking, and 9 to 15% are attributed to radon. And then there's occupational carcinogen exposure and outdoor air pollution. Yeah, that has to be the US because I think
21,000 lung cancer deaths each year.
Yeah. But so what I'm trying to get across is that when your doctor suggests an X-ray, you don't need to be... And you should absolutely talk to your doctor if you have concerns.
Absolutely.
I have never met
a physician
who isn't perfectly happy to sit me down. Okay, maybe I met one or two. Who aren't...
Let's be realistic.
Yeah. Like perfectly happy to sit me down and talk through my concerns about certain things. And they're happy. Good physicians are happy to do that.
Yeah, it's their job to kind of explain it to us.
Yeah, because we are
people who don't have a fucking medical degree.
So X-rays, any of these imaging scans, if they are suggested to you, they are almost certainly the benefits far outweigh the risks, and the doctor has thought about that.
Yep.
And I want you guys to know that your doctor is thinking about that.
Yes.
Because, that's part of their job, is to weigh the risks and the benefits. And that is literally anything that they suggest to you. Whether they suggest to you that you go home and you take Tylenol, they are weighing the risks and the benefits of telling you to take Tylenol. So, so think about radiation exposure in terms of amounts and frequency.
In which, honestly, mainly frequency.
Yes. Yeah. Because a lot of radiation just once in your life, it can kill you. But it can also, if it's a small amount, it can not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
There is that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
We don't fully understand radiation.
Yeah, no, wherever, we kind of cover this in one of our other episodes, but it's like we're constantly learning.
Yeah.
And evolving as a species.
Especially in medical and technological advances, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or, fields. But that is I will get off my soapbox now. So, radium specifically was used for a variety of things when it was first discovered.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most known uses was as a component in paint to make sections of aviation instruments and clock and watch faces glow in the dark.
Mm. Not surprised.
Yeah, so it's one of those paints that kind of soaks up light during the day,
mm-hmm.
and then at night it continues to be luminous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So initially, it was also thought to have positive health benefits. This was for a very, very short period of time. This was in large part because of how successful it was in the treatment of cancer. So, for example, there is a form of cancer therapy called brachytherapy, where a radioactive source is placed inside or beside a tumor to shrink it. I actually know at least one person that this was used for. And it lets a doctor use a slightly higher amount of radiation, which can be more effective because it is much more targeted. Radium was initially used for this treatment, but it isn't really today because there are safer alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the idea at the time was an element that can cure, quote unquote, cure cancer has to be a miracle cure-all, right?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert, no.
Mm-hmm.
So, radium most commonly enters the body when it is swallowed or breathed in, and it can cause cancer, anemia, cataracts, broken teeth, reduced bone growth, and of course, death. Shocking nobody. Shocking many people, apparently, actually.
Yeah.
The general rule of thumb for radium, as it is understood today,
mm-hmm.
Is that it is probably not very dangerous outside the body, but inside the body,
it's a problem.
Yeah, it can be very dangerous. And I actually thought this was kind of interesting. Radioactive substances, when you ingest or inhale them,
mm-hmm.
most of the radiation just goes through you,
yeah,
you just excrete it out.
Okay.
Through the medical process of excretion.
I don't know why. It's,
That's a worse word.
I know, because it's like, I know a lot of people have a issue with the word moist. But for some reason,
for you, it's excretion.
It's not even really that bad. It's just when it hits me unexpectedly, I'm just like,
yeah.
Well, because I don't think of natural excretion like sweat.
Yeah, okay. So, and then I also wanted to take a quick example before we get into some of the other stuff to talk about, or a second, sorry, not an example, to talk about how radioactive radium is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be doing this with some examples. Example number 1 is that radium's half-life is 1,600 years. So for those of you who aren't familiar with radioactive half-lives, that is the time in which it will take a radioactive substance to be half as radioactive, is the way that I understand it. For radium, that was 1,600 years. Mm-hmm. It has not been that long since it has been discovered, my friends. It's been I actually did the math. It's been 124 years. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a feeling my mind is just going to keep getting blown this episode.
Yeah.
I'm like,
this is very, very interesting to me.
It's so fascinating, but I'm also just like, what?
Yeah.
Well, how do you determine? Well,
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, okay.
I think the source said approximately.
Constant rate of
decay.
Decay. Yes, thank you. I was going to say decretion. But I couldn't think of thank you for saving me. I said it anyway, but whatever. If it's a constant rate of decay, then I assume
I think they've done mathematical
equations to figure out, because if it's decreasing by like a point of like 0.15 per every year based off its constant number of when it was, let's just say 3,200 grams, because it's the easiest conversion. And if it's decreasing by 1 gram every year, then obviously the half-life is going to be 1,600 grams.
Yeah.
And
that must have been how, I'm sure that's how it was discovered.
Yeah.
Or, figured out.
See? I'm smart.
So, the Marie Curie was known to carry test tubes of radium around in the pockets of her lab coat, which is something that I think a lot of scientists would cringe at today.
Scientists would cringe at?
Yeah, everybody.
Everyone would kind of, especially after listening to this episode. Oh boy.
Yeah. And then I said parts of the Curie's lab is still radioactive today, such as the back of Marie Curie's chair. There's this specific point on it where she would pull out her chair every day. Like, she would come in, she would open the door, she would pull out her chair and sit down. So the doorknob is still radioactive, and so is that one part in the back of her chair. That's very interesting. Yeah. Marie Curie's body is still radioactive today, over 80 years after her death. Because of their work handling radium, the Curie's lab notebooks are still, to this day, too radioactive to be handled. And that is, again, over a century after radium's discovery. The notebook in which Pierre named radium is too radioactive to handle.
I'm like, I really wish y'all could see my face, because I'm just like,
this stuff is so interesting.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so behind the scene, or BTS, you text me, like, you're like, what should I do my episode? I'm so happy I told you to do radium.
I pulled a couple of people, and pretty much everybody said radium. So, as I discussed just a bit, radium was at first thought to be kind of like a cure-all. It was added to toothpaste, cosmetics, hair creams, food, water. The thing that really had the most resounding effect on today's workplace safety regulations was its use in luminous paints that were used for clocks, watches, instrument dials, and aircraft switches. During World War I, factories were established to make all sorts of equipment for soldiers, but the ones that are important to what we are talking about today were established in the U.S. and were making watches and military dials with glowing hands and or numbers, so you could still read them in the dark. They would soak up, as normal. Soak up light during the day. At night, you could still read them.
They could emit, yeah.
Obviously, a lot of men were at war, and this was thought to be something that women, with our little tiny delicate hands, were well suited for. So...
There is no commentary available at this moment.
And they were painted by the amount of watch faces that they were able to complete, and they were actually paid pretty well for the time. So a lot of young women, usually minors at this point, like teenagers,
child labor laws.
were hired to paint watch faces with self-luminous paint made with radium. So at the time, there were very little precautions put into place for these women. They would go home covered in radium dust, literally glowing, and they would even wear their best dresses to work when they planned to go somewhere afterwards, because they would look radiant afterwards. So it was actually said on Fridays they would wear their ball gowns to work, and then go dancing afterwards. Some of them painted their nails and even their teeth so that they would have glowing, radiant smiles. Yeah. So some of them said that the glow of their hands after a shift actually made it easier to read at night, which I was like, bro, I hate that I can relate to that. Yeah. This is something the two of us would have been guilty of. At the time,
God, I would have been stupid.
Yeah, I know. At the time, they were sometimes called ghost girls because of the glowing effects that the radium dust had on them.
Oh, good gravy.
So, on top of that, they were also they all pretty much did something called lip pointing. And this is something that we are all probably familiar with just from like the idea of artists. So, the surfaces they were working with were very, very small, and they needed precision, and the bristles of the paintbrushes spread as you paint.
Oh my god.
Yeah, you can see where I'm going with this, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I need to stop reading ahead.
To get them back to a point, the women were either instructed to by their employers or learned to use the tips of their lips to wet the bristles and bring them back to a point. And each time that they would do that, they would ingest a trace amount of radium. Let's remember for a second to think about this in terms of frequency of exposure. Some of these women would lip point after every letter, or after every number, I mean. So if there were a couple of these women who ingested, they did the lip pointing once or twice, and they just really hated the taste, and so they wouldn't do it. And there were a couple of them that lived up to like 107, 104. Some of these women would lip point after every number on the dial, which means, depending on how you look at it, either 12 or 15 numbers on a watch face. Like if you take into account the 2 digits of 3 of the numbers. Sometimes over 200 watch faces per shift for 5 days a week. I actually don't know how many. Yeah. 4 years.
Yikes.
And they were never aware that they were in danger. So Molly Maggia, I don't know 100% that I'm pronouncing that right. That's an Italian name. I'm sorry. Molly Maggia was painting clock faces for the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation in New Jersey in January of 1922 when she got a toothache. Like many people at that time in history, she went to the dentist, and the dentist pulled it.
Yep.
And then she got another toothache. And then she got another toothache. And every time she had a tooth extracted, the wounds refused to heal, and instead she developed bleeding, pus-filled ulcers where the teeth were extracted. Eventually, her doctor was doing an extraction on another tooth, and when he saw her jawbone, it looked ashy and white, and when he touched it with the instrument, it crumbled in her mouth, her jawbone. Eventually, her lower jaw completely just had to be removed. And in September of 1922, 8 months after her first toothache, she died of hemorrhage when one of her tumors ate through her jugular vein.
That's insane.
Yep. So, at the time, this is very weird to me. Her cause of death was determined by laymen making up a coroner's jury. Kind of a lot like court cases are determined by a jury today. Yeah. I don't know how.
No, I read the cause of death.
Yeah, so for some reason, the jury found her cause of death to be syphilis. Shockingly. This case is the reason that today it is medical examiners and not a coroner's jury that rules on cause of death. So,
understandably.
Yeah. So, and this started just kind of a snowball effect. More of the girls got sick, and they had a lot of the same symptoms that Molly Maggia did. And a lot of their doctors were looking at Molly Maggia's cause of death and being like, okay, you have syphilis. But these girls were actually extremely smart, and they put two and two together very, very quickly. Like, so these girls, their spines crumbled, their legs collapsed as they walked. They got cataracts and they got cancer and they got all sorts of horrific, horrific symptoms. They were dying in horrible, horrible ways. And very quickly, they put two and two together. Very quickly, they went to their various employers wanting help, wanting their medical bills paid for, wanting to live, or even honestly, just wanting the company to change safety requirements, because the company, like, they some of these girls would have concerns and they would be like, is lip pointing safe? And their employers would tell them, yeah,
it's fine.
it's probably even good for you, because
Yeah.
at the time that was what was accepted.
I mean, it's like at
about
one point in
radium.
time, smoking was good for you.
Yeah. But the employers, they doubled the fuck down and refused to acknowledge the effects of radium. The negative effects, anyway. So an independent study they didn't pay for found that the women were right and outraged this one company, the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation, paid for a second investigation, which shockingly found that radium didn't have negative health effects. Who's heard of such a thing? I'm taking a shot of water like it's vodka. Yeah.
I'm thinking about it. Somebody get me some Ciroc. What the fuck?
So, it is important to mention at this time that the health effects of radium were becoming increasingly more understood. If you handle too much radium for too long, you will get burns and eroded skin from it, and that is something that Marie Curie experienced, along with people who worked at these factories.
Yeah.
Pierre actually once said that he never wanted to be in a room with an entire kilogram of radium because he was afraid that it might make him blind and burn his skin. And remember, he died in 1906. Molly Maggia died in 1922.
Yeah.
Higher ups at the factories understood the risks associated with radium. This is a fact, because, they didn't understand it as well as we do today, but certainly better than they let on. If workers were handling larger amounts of radium, and let's be brutally honest for a second, if the workers were male, they were being instructed to take precautions such as wearing lead aprons when handling the substance. And then, maybe at first the radium girls were honestly just overlooked when it came to safety. But when they started to show signs of negative health effects, these companies refused to admit any wrongdoing and refused to protect their current dial painters. Finally, in 1925, a pathologist named Harrison Martland developed a test that conclusively proved these women were dying from radium poisoning. He is also, just side note, he is the one who got, at least in New Jersey, the coroner's jury abolished and started using actual trained medical examiners to rule on cause of death.
Good.
The companies fought him, of course, tooth and nail on this, but eventually, even with months or weeks to live, the Radium Girls fought alongside him, trying to get protections in place for future workers. These women knew that they were dying. They came to court with open, infected sores, with massive tumors, bones crumbling in their bodies, literally wheeled in on stretchers on their deathbeds. But finally, in 1927, attorney Raymond Barry agreed to take their case. At this point, they'd been trying a bunch of different attorneys, but because these were such massive, massive corporations, and the corporations were making this a patriotism issue because they were painting watch faces for soldiers. They were making this an issue of patriotism. So attorneys were reluctant to take on this case, but in 1927, Raymond Barry agreed to help them. And at this point, this shit was fucking headline news. The public was realizing that radium was dangerous, but the companies were still refusing to put protections in place for dial painters, causing more and more and more illness and more and more and more death. Finally, in 1938, 4 years after Marie Curie's own death due to her exposure to radium, Catherine Wolfe Donahue, a dying former employee of the Radium Dial Corporation, successfully sued her former employer over her illness. For the first time ever, a company was held responsible for the health and safety of its employees, and there is nothing I can do to correctly communicate the impact that this had on current US law. In this case, it is why OSHA exists, the US Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It is why that exists. This case, what?
Oh, I just said wow.
Okay, yeah. This case is why your employer has to inform you of hazardous conditions, why they have to have safety rules. This case paved the way for forcing employers to care about their workers' safety, a fight that we are still very much fighting today. These girls and women have been cited as a large part of the reason that we understand so much about the effects of radium today, but they did not sign up for that. Like Deborah Bloom, I'm sorry, the author of The Poisoner's Handbook said, we really don't want our factory workers to be the guinea pigs for discovery. Oops is never a good occupational health policy. As of 2015, there was at least one radium girl still alive. 104-year-old Mabel Williams, who worked for the U.S. Radium Corporation at 16. I'm not 100% sure she is still alive, but I couldn't find... Okay. She probably died in 2015 at... I think that would have been 104. She, I'm almost certainly, was probably one of the girls who just... There was at least one girl who just didn't like the taste. Yep, she never lip pointed.
She always said she didn't think that was a good idea.
Yeah, and she was right.
Often said that at night he would see
specks of glowing in her hair, and she would get up and wash it out. So she was careful when few people were, which is, yeah.
Interesting.
And there were, some of these girls did ask, are you sure this isn't dangerous? And their employers would tell them,
no,
it's probably even good for you.
Yeah.
They were failed, and sometimes you wonder if it was intentional, you know? So it looks like she passed in 2015, and she may have been the last alive radium girl.
Yeah.
To wrap this part up, these objects that were painted with radium in the 20th century, they actually do still exist today. If you find any, you are urged not to use them and to contact your local radiation control program for instructions on proper disposal. I've seen that they aren't necessarily dangerous as long as they are intact and not being used to store food or drink, but personally, I don't think that I would want one in my home.
Yeah.
Also, I thought this was pretty interesting. Because so many of these were being used in military aircraft, vehicles, equipment, there's actually still a massive radium cleanup going on in some military sites to this day.
I can imagine.
Yeah, because it's just a lot of shit. So, today actually, radium still has some uses. It is much less than it was originally. It's still sometimes used to target bone cancer. It's still extracted actually from radium in a very similar way to how the Curies and Debier first isolated it. I thought this was really, really interesting. When radium encounters bone, it acts a lot like calcium in that it gravitates towards new growth in bone, which makes it very, very useful in the treatment of bone cancer and other abnormal bone growths. Which I thought was super cool.
That is actually super cool, especially since I know someone who had bone cancer.
Yeah. So most of the research today seems to focus on its use in treating bone cancer or cancer that has metastasized to the bone, which I didn't know that was not, those two things were not the same. But radium isn't generally used in medical imaging anymore, but it is apparently still sometimes used in industrial radiography, which is like they use imaging to check for cracks or flaws in material. But this is very closely regulated for public health reasons. Obviously.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if I want to end with one of these quotes by Marie Curie. I think my favorite quote by Marie Curie is, "I believe that science has great beauty. A scientist in his laboratory is not a mere technician. He's also a child confronting natural phenomena that impress him as though they were mere fairy tales."
And another quote, which I like from her, is, "Life is not easy for any of us, but what of that? We must have perseverance and above all, confidence in ourselves."
This has been a discussion of the discovery of radium.
You can go to our website at awmpa.com to get all of our social media and find our episodes. We hope that you found this episode interesting and enlightening and enjoyed our season finale, and we'll talk to you on October 6th.